Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. For those of you who attended last week, I'm glad to be back and glad we can take another shot at this webinar. I was sick last week, so we had to discontinue the webinar. So, this webinar really is intended for families who have participants at Evoke to be able to pass on to their support group, to aunts and uncles, grandparents, close family friends, a webinar that's going to explain what we do at Evoke. And that way, they can know better how to support you, and you can also use this tool to help them understand what your family is going through. So I'm going to talk about something all the way from the beginning to what we do at Evoke and what wilderness therapy is at Evoke therapy programs. So let's first start off with the idea of the decision. This decision, the decision to send your child to a wilderness therapy program, often comes after many failed attempts. I think one of the misunderstandings that people might have is that this is a last resort. It doesn't have to be a last resort. In fact, most of the time when you would think of somebody having any kind of problems, especially a medical condition, you wouldn't think of intervening at the last possible second when things got worse. And the other thing, and I've said this before, is that most of our participants would tell you by the end of their stay at Evoke therapy programs, they would say that everybody could benefit from this intervention. So this is an intervention where some things at home haven't worked, but it also is an intervention that is incredibly powerful, positive in many people's life. And a lot of our former clients and alumni will say that this was one of the best times in their life, one of the times in their life when they experienced the most growth. I like to think of it as a time when your child is not able or willing to be a part of the solution. And again, I want to steer away from thinking everything has to be tried. But I think when there is a division, when there's a lack of being on the same page to the extent that you feel like you're really running into the same wall over and over again, that can be a time when you decide, look, this isn't working at home. I'm going to try this therapy accelerator, therapy enhancement that we call wilderness therapy to try to get access to my child and help them with what they might be struggling. Of course, the level of dangerousness in their behavior can be a time when you say, I need to get them out of this context and into a safe place. I think for a lot of people, we talk about this idea of being set up to fail. And Evoke therapy programs is a place where you can be set up to succeed. So when you get to the point, or your child gets to the point where there's serious sadness, helplessness, guilt, and despair, when you feel like you're at the end of your rope, oftentimes this can be an intervention that can bring back hope and bring back a sense of empowerment for you and for the whole family. I think a lot of times we think about interruption, not just crisis management when things get dangerous, but a time of interrupting old cycles and pulling the child out of the context and out of the environment. And again, that can be a piece or a part of the equation where you're getting to the point where you're saying, I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do, outpatient therapy, talking to my child, exercising patience, doing my own work. But the context is so powerful, especially for adolescents and young adults, that it might be a time when you say, I want to change that context. Of course, as problems escalate, as you attempt to intervene to make a difference, and you see those problems escalating, some parents will say, is this too much? Is this too invasive? And then the question that I pose back to parents is, think about an intervention that's too early and the pros and cons of that. And think about an intervention that's too late and think about the pros and cons of that. And as you ask yourself those questions, I think it'll become obvious that an intervention that is too late really has potentially very disastrous, very dangerous consequences, where an intervention that's too early won't have those same kind of negative consequences. Is this a last resort? Like I've said earlier on this page, this is the time that I think is really enhancing. When I sent my own son to our program years ago, he wasn't really at the level that some might consider necessary to send to wilderness therapy. What I thought is, we need to interrupt this. We need a common language. I want to build a bridge between us. And of course, he graduated from the program. And that became, well, it didn't mean all of our problems were over for the rest of his adolescence, but it became that this common language, this shared experience, this refocus for us that we were able to draw upon as we navigated the always difficult teen years for families. Are they going to be with deviants? A lot of people are worried about that. We like that they're with a range. We don't want complete homogeneity in a group. And we like that there's a range of behaviors. Many students and clients will write home trying to pull at their parents' heartstrings or at their fear and say, everybody here is worse than me, and they'll give examples. And the funny thing for me is that letter gets written by 7 out of 9 people in a given group, which of course it can't all be true. So there are people that have other problems. One of the things that happens as we all progress in mental health is that we see the commonality. So I'll have a lot of students say, look, I didn't do drugs, but my drug was lying. Or, drugs were my escape, but the way that I relate to you and your eating disorder is X, Y, and Z. So a piece of evidence of good mental health is when we can see the similarities between our struggles and others instead of the differences. So there's a lot of similarities, and they benefit from that. And the fact of the matter is that the level of supervision is so significant out there that while there are temptations and influences that can be positive at times and negative at times, that it's supervised at such a level that it's like real-time therapy. If there were no temptations, right, there were no peers that were struggling, then it would be in some ways more difficult to treat children and young adults because they'd be removed from everything. It'd become emotionally and psychologically so sterile that there would be no opportunity to practice some of the interventions and some of the healthy living and tools in real time. I've discussed the idea of too late and too early and asking yourself that question. So what is wilderness therapy? I'll talk about what it is and what it is not. It's a metaphor. It's always strange for me to say that primitive living, wilderness therapy living is a metaphor, but it really is. All of the aspects of it, whether it's making a bowl drill fire or in the wintertime dealing with the winter storms and keeping warm and dry, or the summertime when we have rainstorms in the afternoon and lightning drills that we go on, or being able to put up your own shelter or hiking from location to location. All of those become an indirect way to talk about life. Packing your pack, the things that you carry on your pack, become this metaphor for saying, how do you deal with your burdens? How do you deal with your struggles? How can you listen to direction? How can you accept coaching? How do you deal with things that are outside of your control? How do you deal with it when it's difficult? And in this metaphor, nature becomes the antagonist, and your child becomes the protagonist. So it's not about battling mom and dad and the arbitrary rules that they make up that are about them, but it's saying, this is like life. This is what happens, and what do we do? I told the story just today to somebody. I remember visiting my son in wilderness therapy, and I remember being frustrated at the rain because I thought it was interrupting my experience with my son. And I quickly caught myself and realized this is life. It's not ideal. It doesn't go my way, and I can't control the weather. So it becomes a metaphor for all of our problems. And it's not necessarily a direct conversation a lot of the time, and that's helpful because metaphor is a fantastic way to bypass conscious resistance. If I come in the room and start talking to you or your child about your problems directly, overtly, and I walk in the front door of that, our minds are often likely to block that out and to resist that. But if I'm telling you a story or sharing a metaphor or we're participating in a metaphorical ceremony, your conscious mind isn't as apt, likely, able to recognize the content and block it out. So it's a way to bypass resistance. It becomes a microcosm. I can't tell you how many times I and our Evoke therapists have said over the years, after a week or two, describing to a parent what we're seeing, and the parent saying to us, you get it. You see my child. And the reason we see your child is because they show up. And their peers and the staff and the environment and the context and nature all becomes players that they demonstrate who they are in that process. They have the same coping skills. They develop the same kinds of relationships. And so we don't always have to rely on all the stories that you tell us or that they tell us. And we really can see it in real time, what's going on for them and how they manage their life. We practice a ritual-based program. So we add to this metaphor rites of passage, ceremonies. Moving from one level to the other, welcoming children into the group by ceremony, welcoming families into the group when they come for a visit or when people leave, having a goodbye ceremony in group. So everything becomes multisensory. So we're not just addressing people, students, clients through the conscious verbal mind, but we're also trying to access all of their senses. And of course, we know how much more that creates learning in people. And also, we find access to areas, to trauma, to difficulties that aren't necessarily stored in the verbal parts of the brain. I don't know how long I could talk about this idea of being unplugged and experiencing this digital detox. I don't think there's a person watching this webinar, both now and in the future, that would fail to see the benefit of pulling yourself away from green screens, from computer, from smartphones, pulling yourself away from TV. We do know that that adds to the ability to repair brain functioning overnight, to get rest, to be able to relax the mind, to increase mindfulness. We know that about those things. And that goes along with most of the things that our children are so drenched in, so immersed in the day-to-day life that they experience at home. It's raw and it's primitive, it's provocative. You know, there's a vulnerability about being outdoors that we confront and that opens us up. I think it happens for parents too. There's a vulnerability about having your child out in the middle of the woods, the mountains, the desert somewhere that opens you up and really increases your capacity to absorb the lessons, the messages, the tools that wilderness therapy offers both the child and the family. All the distractions, even the healthy ones. I'll have parents talk about sending out healthy, entertaining books and other things. And I'll say, it's not that those things are necessarily negative inherently, but we want to increase the focus on what your child is struggling with and what's going on in the family. So we remove all those distractions, even positive peers or positive siblings or positive parents for that matter. There's an opportunity to go deeper into the self and explore it and come out with some wisdom that wasn't there before, or at least they weren't aware of there before. There's a beautiful aspect of it, a sense of how we belong, both how small and how we are also a part of universe and nature. And a lot of clients will make that attribution. They will say that is one of the things that made a difference for them. And there's an invitation, a call for many clients to look at the spiritual side of their lives that they may be neglecting, or that really is a part of the problem that they're presenting with. I want to say this as simple as this. Wilderness therapy is a delivery method. The longer I do this, the more obvious this is to me. It's experiential therapy outdoors in a beautiful setting. It's not punitive or pejorative or demeaning. It's not shame-based or fear-based. But it is a delivery method on which all of the traditional therapies can be delivered. It just gets enhanced by this process that we've created here. It's a family intervention. We involve the family in phone calls, in mentoring, in support groups, in workshops, in intensives, in webinars, of course. We have over 240 archived webinars. So for us, the phone calls, the letter writing, all of it becomes a family intervention, and not just isolating the identified patient, trying to fix them and then pulling them back or putting them back into a context, into a home that hasn't experienced some similar types and levels of change. So what it is not a boot camp. It's not yelling. It's not about discipline and behaviorism. It's not punitive, right? We're not demeaning the client. We actually have a very respectful approach. We value them. We focus on the strengths and the resources. And like I said earlier, the wisdom that we believe is hidden inside of them beneath fear and shame and insecurities. It's not deprivational. It doesn't have all the creature comforts and all the technology that home has. But that's for the purpose of increasing a sense of gratitude and a sense of mindfulness about everything. And you can't take anything for granted out in the wilderness, right? Even taking a shower, getting clean, keeping your hands and feet dry and warm in the wintertime, keeping your feet clean and dry and warm, dealing with mosquitoes. Nothing can be taken for granted. And what we know about life, and I think this is a common American cultural issue, is that gratitude does not come from abundance. Let me say that again. Gratitude isn't born out of abundance. Otherwise, all the people that had more would be more happy and more grateful, and all the people that had less would be less grateful and more unhappy. And I think everybody, again, watching this webinar knows that that's not the case. In fact, it is at times those who have little that are more grateful for what they have. And so it's primitive. That's our language. Right? You have to cook everything, carry everything that you cook on your back. You have to get safe water to every location that you go to. You have to build your shelter. You have to make your fire by rubbing sticks together. So there's an intentionality to it. There's an ability to really appreciate everything that goes into all that we have, but it's not deprivational. It's not unsafe. We know from the research that children at home, the broad population of children in America, are more likely to need emergency care, medical care, than those that are in the wilderness. And those that are in wilderness, by the way, are the higher risk in terms of the the density of the population. There are more at-risk young people in wilderness therapy than there are in the broad population at home, at least by percentage. And you're more physically safe. It's also really safe emotional. We don't use, like I said, guilt and shame and fear and intimidation. That's a constant focus and training, even when you're frustrated. That's not the way we want to talk to, treat, or motivate our children and clients. It's not a punishment. There are, of course, adverse elements in it, right? You want to be with your iPhone. You want to be home laying in your mattress. So there's adverse elements of the program. But we don't think about it as a simple behavioral program. We don't think about it in terms of punishment because it's also a wonderful blessing and opportunity for most or many of our clients. It's not a cure. I added this one late because I thought, all of these other things I think are negative, but I think parents might make the mistake at time or family members or friends might make the mistake of thinking, this is a cure. My child will be fixed. And I think that type of simplistic linear thinking is a part of the issue that the family needs to address. And if a family doesn't let go of that and understand there's going to be ups and downs and backwards and forwards and sideways and mistakes, in perpetuity and for the rest of their life, that if we don't shift our mindset to that, I think it can be a very disappointing process. It can give language. It can really interrupt old patterns. It can give clarity to the entire system. It can shift roles. It can shift and improve communication. It can heal wounds. It can give people new coping mechanisms, new tools to deal with, a new way of thinking about themselves and pain and problems and struggle. It can do all of that, but it doesn't make somebody perfect. And that's a very important principle that we want everybody that's considering it or enrolling in it to understand. It's not coercive or controlling. We have a webinar. One of my favorite webinars is on control versus influence, and we teach that to our therapists and our staff. We set up clear boundaries. We communicate clearly. I had a student tell me years ago, he said, this is the safest I've ever felt and the most free that I've ever felt. And the rules in wilderness therapy, in our wilderness therapy program, they're more strict than most other contexts. But the freedom he was describing with, I could make choices, I wasn't being intimidated, I was allowed to feel and think anything I wanted to about the intervention, and so I felt free. The freedom that children are looking for, and they'll complain about a lot of structure and rules, but the real freedom they're looking for, do I get to feel and think what I want? They can adjust to any level of structure, but what almost nobody can adjust to is this energy, this want, this desire that is coercive and controlling emotionally. It's not intimidating. That's just not what we do. And like I've said, the role of shame and guilt in our program is minimal. In fact, most often with parents and children, we're trying to get them out of their shame and their guilt so they can live a healthier, more productive life. Because shame and guilt contribute to hiding. They contribute to not wanting to look at oneself. They contribute to a lack of awareness. So this is about opening up and really improving because of love and light and awareness and strength and tool building and new perspective, not because of fear and shame and being judged or rejected. So why wilderness? Why use this? This is kind of builds on that. That idea of metaphors. This is why Freud talked about dreams. This is why the ink blot test works. Because if you walk in the back door, the side door, in therapy, you're not going to engage resistance. So it works with resistance. The positive peer milieu cannot be overstated. The amount of feedback, insight, sharing, mentoring, learning, teaching that goes on amongst the peers is as an effective element as any part of our program. Like I said, it helps deal with resistant adolescents or young adults or adults for that matter. It's a self-esteem, a sense of esteem comes from meeting challenges, from overcoming difficulties, from recognizing that what I do makes a difference. Our research shows us that one of the features that's improved dramatically in wilderness therapy is internal locus of control, which is a phrase that means that what I do makes the biggest difference in my life, not what happens to me. And that's all a part of self-esteem. Self-esteem also comes from healthy connection. The letter writing therapy, the family therapy, the therapy with these wonderfully gifted big-hearted staff members, and that's the number one thing that former clients attribute to their change is the staff members. This connection that they feel is a contribution to self-esteem like no other. The experience of being found, of being seen, of being known is the greatest contribution to anybody's self-esteem. It's that experience of, yeah, that's right, that's where I am. Jessica Benjamin, the attachment theorist, would say that the root of the self is almost always found through another human being, which is to say that when somebody else finds me, I find myself. And so self-esteem in connection with these wonderful staff members who stay out there 8 days in a row are huge contributors to a child's self-esteem and to their success in our program. A sense of identity, who am I? You know, there's this idea that we can't, if we're struggling, especially with basic needs, how can we work on identity? What we know from primitive cultures is that our identity is often carved out or defined in struggle, in challenge. And I think in America, again, we have this ideal of we want to remove pain and difficulty and challenge sometimes because it's uncomfortable. So we want to remove that. And then we think we're going to abstractly, intellectually kind of teach and pass on this sense of identity. It's in the context of struggling that we learn identity. I talked about the group microcosm and the removal of distractions and defenses. You can't manipulate wilderness, right? And I mean that literally, but I also mean that it's so, the supervision is so comprehensive, the staff are so talented, the peers that are there all the time, right? You don't separate, you're always together. And so although you might be a good group therapy client, right? You might be very therapized, you're going to leak your true self somewhere. Maybe it's during lunch or breakfast or a hike, but that's going to come out. And so the inability to manipulate the wilderness milieu also, and everybody in it, is an important part of wilderness therapy. Rites of passage I discussed. It's a sterile assessment environment. Now, physically, it's not a sterile environment, but it's sterile in the sense that you're removing a lot of variables, right? You're removing the peer group. You're removing even some of the family members for a time. Eventually, we want the child, the client, to be back with their family, but for a time, it's just you sitting out there with yourself and with this new group of people. And the ability to make a clear assessment is pretty potent with wilderness therapists, as many of you might know. The negative influences are either removed or often supervised at the level that we're able to intervene in real time, like I said. I described the vulnerability and being outside of our comfort zone. We know that very little growth occurs for most of us when we're still inside of our comfort zone. And so being out there in primitive living environments is a part of that. The development of interdependence, the ability to ask for help. There are so many times when part of the intervention, some of you might be surprised, is that some students and clients aren't allowed to do any chores for the group because they're so dependent, right? And they foster that dependence in others. And so it's an ability to say, this is what I can do. And it's more than I ever thought. I convinced myself and my parents in many cases that I was much more fragile than I am. So there's a resilience, recognition, and development. And also I can ask for help. I can learn. And there's something about the wilderness staff and even the wilderness therapists and feeding and taking care of them and teaching them how to build a shelter and make their backpack and cook wonderful food from the ingredients. All of that modeling, mentoring that occurs starts to build a healthy sense of interdependence, especially when it's paired with healthy boundaries about when the child says to me or to the client, or to the therapist or the staff, I can't do this, and our response is both in word and in behavior, I don't believe you. I don't believe that you can't. And by the end of the program, when they can and they recognize it, they realize and reflect back on the lie that they've told themselves and convinced themselves and others. We don't want your children to get perfectly well, perfectly fast. And so the futility of the old ways of coping, of trying to run away or escape or ignore or fight or argue or threaten or whine, whatever it is, that gets illuminated in this process. And they have to experience futility in those old escape routes for them to want to and to be willing to change. And the environment is very well contained to create that dead end, if you will. How wilderness therapy works, it's partially intervention that is crisis management. So getting everybody a chance to breathe, take a step back and create an assessment about what's our long-term plan? What are we dealing with? And then, of course, there's treatment. It happens. There's treatment progress. And then there's preparation, recommendations for the next step. So it's really a four-pronged approach. We have four goals. crisis intervention, assessment, treatment, which, by the way, a lot of people say, why go to wilderness therapy if they're going to go to a therapeutic school or program afterwards, because many of them do. The answer would be because it changes the level of care. Because we can deal with a level of acuity, of resistance, of temper tantruming and behavior that a lot of therapeutic schools and programs can't. So we can change the level of care. And of course, the treatment progress makes a difference in their lives. And then we make recommendations for aftercare. So you disrupt the old system and you immerse. That's an important word, immerse them into a new system. It amplifies the problems, the weaknesses, the strengths, the behavior, and the consequences. It creates a kind of intensity. And enactment is a word in therapy, means to engage somebody in a role play or an activity that replicates or looks like their old behavior or their old ways of being back home. So they have an opportunity to repair it. So you're creating you're turning up the volume on the child or the young adult's issues and strengths and coping mechanisms. There are, of course, a lot of natural and logical consequences that can happen out in the wilderness if we just get out of the way. Nothing gets to the point of being unsafe, but you get wet sometimes when your shelter isn't properly built, right? Your back gets sore if you're not listening to the staff's instruction about building a backpack. It's hard to get warm around a bunch of dry sticks unless you've built that fire, on and on and on. So there's a lot of wonderful logical and natural consequences that aren't contrived. Participants in wilderness therapy will say to you, and this is from the research, that when the interventions start to become contrived, that they get less out of them. And when the interventions are inherent in the environment, they get more out of them. So we do know that from our research and our follow-up studies. Like I've already mentioned, the internal versus external locus of control, shifting from the most important thing to determine my happiness is the events of my life to how I learn to deal with them is going to make the biggest difference on my happiness, my meaning, my quality of life. And then there's this captive audience without walls. You know, there's not physical brick and mortar walls. We have offices, of course, but they're out there on the mountain in the desert. And that's a powerful way to remain, to have some containment, if you will. It's hard to walk away or to run away without putting up those barriers. And of course, the mountains and the deserts and the forests are incredibly beautiful. So what are our goals in wilderness therapy? It's a wake-up call. Many people will think about it this way. Sometimes you're thinking about creating a new bottom. People will say you have to get to a bottom. Part of our job as parents is to create a bottom, right? To create consequences that teach principles and to say, this is what happens when you do this, when you're struggling, when you're not working with me, when you're hurting people, when you're hurting yourself. This is what happens. And that becomes a new bottom for them. In the same way that a spouse who leaves an alcoholic husband or somebody who gets fired from a job might create a bottom for them, a triggering event that is motivating positive change. You're trying to buy some time, interrupt the crisis, provide a safe space and a time when everybody, including the parents, can take a breath and look at what's ahead. I've discussed the therapeutic benefit, the evaluative feedback that we provide to home therapists, to the family, to consultants. The wilderness therapist's job is to translate what's going on in the wilderness. Parents attribute change to the therapist because that's who they have their primary contact with. And like I said earlier, clients, students and young adults, clients, they attribute the change to the staff that are out there, which are, like I've said already many times, are amazing people. But we're providing this, these wilderness therapists are providing this evaluation and feedback and recommendations. We find out what doesn't work just as often as we find out what does work. I always say, you know, if you're doing your job well, it's never a failure because you learn what does and doesn't work, right? I've heard about inventors say, I've learned 100 ways that this doesn't work. And so I've narrowed it down a little bit. So we provide that kind of feedback. You're starting to get the family engaged. There's not just a leverage with the client because they want to get back to regular life, but there's a leverage with parents where you can say, look, this is a short period of time. Your child's out there doing very challenging, difficult, very, very wonderful things. So this is a time for you to start that journey, to get involved, to accelerate, to get up to speed. So there's an opportunity to establish the family work and the family plan and creating a system focused on change and on growth. We're preparing them for the next step. Students and clients will move from denial and anger often to being resigned. Yes, I'm going to a therapeutic school or a step-down program or a sober living environment. And then they get to accepting it. You know, it's okay. And then oftentimes they get to the point of investment where many of them will say, if I went home, it wouldn't work. And you can't wait for that, but it happens. I was that's one of the things I was most amazed by in my first few months as a wellness therapist is how resilient and how able they were to adjust to this when the boundary was firm and clear and from a place of love. There's a softening effect. I described that earlier where we take some of the rough edges of the initial resistance and battle off so that they actually qualify for a different level of care with more freedom and more opportunities after wellness therapy. Um, there's a special kind of ability to design in these small groups. Even though we might have several groups at Evoke therapy programs, each group is a handful of students and clients. And so, and because the staff shifts are so long, you really do create this thread through therapy that's so consistent and that provides us the opportunity to create interventions in and around the peer groups so that modeling and socialization is a part of it. It's easy for some people to say, I'll just wait for the next shift of staff to come on, or I'll just, I don't have to deal with this guy or this girl over here. But when you're in a small group, nomadic wilderness therapy group, you can't do that as easily. You have to deal with it, confront your issues and confront the conflict, deal with the conflict and problem solving issues. It's an assessment. We can provide objective testing, that is psychological tests, and of course the observations that we make and report to parents are a part of it. I wanted to just highlight a typical day. I'm gonna actually let you read some of this. I don't know that I'll read everything, but there's morning sessions and activities, cooking and cleaning and getting camp cleaned up for the day if there's going to be a hike. They get a lot of sleep out here. They dream so vividly. Part of it is being away from green screens and technology. Part of it is being emotionally and physically exhausted at the end of the day, but they have rich dreams. So they wake up in the morning. There are mindful activities, yoga activities, of course, breakfast, cooking, cleaning, all of those activities. They have 5 days a week. It is our intention for them to be hiking and moving campsites most weeks. There are 2 layover days that are for the therapist visit where they can read letters, write letters, have sit-down individual therapy sessions and group sessions with their therapist. They're having groups all day long with their staff in between, anywhere from 2 formal groups to the 10 or 15 informal groups that happen throughout the day. So everything becomes grist for the therapeutic mill out there. Like it says here, they break for lunch. They might have a group on a hike. Somebody might be dealing with conflict amongst or between each other out there in the group. Maybe a letter is weighing on somebody or they're having a bad day, so groups can happen anytime. They have chores that rotate every day, and typically they're managed by the more senior peer, and they'll rotate a little bit, so they have groups that rotate all the time. But everything takes team effort, and it really shows up when somebody's not doing their part. And then you have the opportunity, how are we going to deal with this? And then they have the opportunity to participate in a role a lot like parents, which is how do we deal with it when Johnny or Susie over here doesn't want to do anything and is angry and sulking and blaming and sarcastic? How do I deal with that as the group leader? And there's benefits all the way through the program to be the most advanced one in the group or more advanced, and one who's on the lower level in terms of experience and insight. And so everybody gets to move through those various stages of leadership and growth and mentoring. We have fun time. We have personal time every day typically where they get to work on either therapy assignments or books that they might be reading, schoolwork also. In many cases with the adolescents, they're working on specific credits, and young adults, they can also sign up for credits for college. So all of that is happening during P time, during personal time. They cook together. There's 2 formal groups a day. And like I said, everything becomes grist for the mill. One of the things that we have a passion about is family support. That's why I'm on this webinar right now. That's why we do webinars for siblings. That's why we do webinars for even family and friends of our Evoke participants. Weekly phone call with the therapist are kind of the hub of everything, but parents also have a family coordinator or parent coordinator who they can ask daily questions about the website or assignments or logistics or letters or mailing something in. Also, we have alumni who have volunteered to mentor new families during those vulnerable, critical first couple of weeks, and everybody has the opportunity to be assigned one of those. The webinars I've already listed how many we have. I think we're above 240 now. We have a robust parent portal where they can see journals from the group, updates from the group, pictures, They can see videos in some cases. They can see assignments for themselves. They can check off the little tick box. There's a standard set of assignments that get posted each week. Then there's also and therapists can delete those if they think it doesn't apply. And there's also a therapist assigned section. And we don't want to overwhelm parents, but we want them to get in this culture of change and personal growth and reflection. So there's a robust parent portal with all of these resources. There are opportunities to do phone calls in the field with your child, with the child, throughout the process. Even though we start off with very little contact and letter writing and move to eventually to potentially phone calls and maybe even a mid-program visit or an end-of-program visit, and it could be and or an end-of-program visit. And sometimes clients and students have the opportunity to write siblings, to write even positive family and friends at home, sometimes even negative influenced people at home that were a negative influence on them. We expand the box, if you will, as they make progress throughout. And it's based on what the therapist and the family decide on their weekly phone calls. But there's those opportunities to have phone calls with your child. So again, the therapist can practice in real time to help the family navigate communication, relationships, and so forth. Visits out to the field are a further extension of that. We have parent workshops about every 6-7 weeks so that everybody will have the chance to go to one. We want all of our families to go to those, and you'll see the list of that at the end. The next one is April 18th and 19th. I try to do parent support groups all over the country. We have standard ones on the East Coast in New York. I'm also doing Philadelphia this week. We have Southern California and Northern California. After Philadelphia, I'll be working toward the center part of the country. So we'll set those up and you'll see those announcements. And then, of course, I don't know if there's anything more powerful than letter writing therapy because you can slow it down. You can talk about it, right? It's there. You can see it. You can replace it with different tools, different ways of thinking and seeing and speaking. And I don't know of any more effective way to do that than letter. So letter writing therapy is it's the flagship therapy, if you will. It's the centerpiece of our therapy in many cases. It increases intentionality and self-reflection and decreases the manipulation and the reactiveness that both parent and child, not just child, but parent and child engage in with each other. What can you do to help as a family support person with your Evoke participant, family, friend, is ask questions. Before you start giving advice, ask questions, learn about it. The fact that you're watching this webinar is very, very positive. And try to understand them and their story and what they've gone through. This is often, almost always, a different experience of their child than you had. That's just the way that it is in families with children. So try to be open and support them as best possible. Even if you think they're doing the wrong thing, the best way to support them is with love and compassion and understanding. And at some point I tell them, the Evoke family, that if the people around you aren't being supportive, you have my therapeutic permission to cut them off and to say, I'm not going to have this discussion with you anymore. This is my decision. If you can't support it or seek to understand it, then this is going to have to stop. But if you're watching this, then I think you're on the track, on the trail to supporting them. Express concerns if you have them, if there's an understanding they have. Fact of the matter is most people don't know what wellness therapy is, and they imagine it's some kind of boot camp or some kind of punishing or deprivational experience. But listen to the explanation. Listen to their stories about what's happening for them and for their child instead of just complaining and not listening. And if you're asked to write a letter to the participant, you can do that. And in many cases, that can be a part of a child's program, is to get letters from siblings, from uncles and aunts, grandparents, support system. That can be a part of it. Try to avoid judgment, blame, and nagging. Again, they have the right to make this decision, and they can eventually say, it's not okay. I need support. This is hard. This is painful. This is scary. This is uncomfortable. And I can set a boundary, is what I tell them. It takes more than love to help children. If it took love, we wouldn't have a program. If that's all it took, I should say. That's important. You have to have that. But there are tools and skills. I can want a beautiful house, but if I don't have the tools and skills to build it or to get somebody to build it for me, it doesn't matter what I fantasize about. So it's more complicated than just love. And because of our own flawed, imperfect human upbringing, we don't have all of those things and have all of that clarity. It's inside of us. And we try to, forgive the pun, evoke it, call it out of both our students, clients, and our parents. But it takes It takes some training. It takes some skill building. It takes some insight development. At the end of the day, I say this: parents are doing the best they can, right? They're trying the best. They're desperate in some cases, and at the end of the day, you turn it over to the child, right? You say, "What are you going to do with this?" Sometimes I'll sit with a client and I'll say, "Okay, I'm going to agree with you for the sake of discussion. You shouldn't be here." Right? And I can think of a lot of things in my life that shouldn't have happened, right? Meaning that my best friend getting cancer, right? Or my parents getting divorced. I could go on and on and on about things that shouldn't have happened in my life. And now what are you going to do? And I don't mean that sarcastically, or I don't mean to be short or playful about it, but what are you going to do? What are you going to do when your teacher gives you a grade that you don't deserve, or your girlfriend or your boyfriend leave you and you don't think you deserve it? Or your parents send you to Evoke and you don't think you deserve it? How will you cope with it? How will you deal with it? Because the amount of things in your life that happen that you're going to have the thought, this shouldn't be happening to me, is numberless. So let's compassionately discuss with each other, what are you going to do with this intervention? That's what I call turning it over to the child. Learn the communication model so that at least you have some shared language and tools. You can watch the webinar, ask your Evoke family member or friend, ask them to share the communication webinar with you so that you can understand what's the basic psychological therapeutic tool that is being presented to all of our clients. And then, this is a strange thing to say, but give support instead of ask for it. I've had parents say, the amount of questions, the amount of updates that my family is asking of me, is requiring of me, I can't do it. I'm the one in crisis. So ask them, how can I support you? What can I do? Is there anything I can do to add to it? Let me know. Please ask me what I can do to help. And if I overstep my bounds, I invite you to share that with me. To tell me to take a step back, to back off. To tell me you've got to take care of yourself. Those are the most, I think, powerful, and that's a little bit sophisticated for most people, ways that we can support our family and friends who are going through this experience where their child is at a Evoke therapy program. And then focus on your common goals. You want for them and their child to build resilience and hope. That's really what we're trying to do at Evoke for everybody. You want that Evoke participant to have positive self-esteem. You want them to have healthy judgment. You want them to be making decisions that are benefiting and furthering their life, their goals. And of course, you want them to have some academic success and social skills and success. You want them to be physically healthy, to have a rich spiritual life, to be connected to relationships and family, and to be mentally healthy. You all want all of those things. So focus on that. You might have a different idea of how to get there, but focus on what you do have in common. And again, learn how Evoke does it. Look at our website, evoketherapy.com. Visit our website. Learn and browse through our philosophy, our clinical approach. Why Evoke? What's Evoke specifically about? Our level of communication with families and professionals that are supporting the family is, our commitment is as passionate, as comprehensive as we can possibly make it. We have, like you've heard tonight, somewhat while you're watching this, a level of clinical sophistication that overlays the wilderness experience that's a part of it. And we're flexible, and we're willing to ask ourselves questions and find out new ways to evolve and help families and clients. We just recently started a program for families and couples and parents where we're going to be doing intensives. You can go to the website, and even if you don't have an Evoke family member there, we're going to be running 3 and 6 day intensives throughout the year. We added a young adult 28-day adventure program for non-clinically acute young adults. People that need something to do in the summer, reconnect to themselves, right? Get a kind of refresher in the experience and doing some of the most amazing world-class canyoneering and hiking and river rafting and so forth. So we have one coming up this June for, I believe it's a focus on canyoneering, 28 days. Our focus on whole health, right? It's not just talk therapy, right? It's not just getting them in physical shape, but it's really focusing on the body, the mind, and the spirit, and finding ways to complement and access all the parts of ourselves. Our ability to decode, to translate the wilderness experience into practical take-home lessons for the child, the young adult or adolescent child, and for the family. We have a commitment at Evoke for organizational health, which means that we're going to support to the best that we can. We're committed to this, and that every employee's whole health is considered, providing them opportunities for academic, professional, and personal growth experiences. Of course, having the owners involved at every level so that the people that are making decisions are dealing daily on the front line with clients and with families. The amount of family support, again, in many of these areas, Evoke stands alone. Our commitment to these things. And we see ourselves as growing and evolving and adding more services as we go forward. Our commitment, Evoke's research team, and this is objective, has contributed more to the industry, to the field of wilderness therapy and research than any other wilderness programs, and it's not very close. I get told that by the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs. Our website bears this out. We're finishing up our second longitudinal study. We have published in peer-reviewed journals and APA journals. So our commitment, our investment in observing and evaluating what we do and how it works and if it works is unparalleled, simply unparalleled. And then our focus on take-home, on generalizability, on creating an intervention that has enduring positive changes for the family and the client. Figuring out new ways. We're holding a conference just this April. We're holding a conference with professionals in the industry that we're hosting, saying, what can we do better to get adolescents and young adults out of residential treatment settings and back home successfully? What are we missing? What are we not doing? What are the bridges that we're not paying attention to? What are we not doing while they're with us? As a company, as a therapeutic team, as an industry. That's something we're hosting for professionals this April as an example of our commitment to this generalizability. So I don't know if there are any live questions that I would be happy to take and address before we close, but we'll leave that space right now if you want to pass those on to me, Stephanie. None so far. While you're waiting for them, Stephanie, wait till I get to the end. We'll do this. Here are upcoming support groups. Orange County on March 25th. Los Angeles on March 30th. Please respond to those two to 49jennifer@live.com. Jennifer Graham is running those. I will be running it with a therapist for 2 of ours in Philadelphia on March 31st and in New York City on April 1st. You can email webinar at drbradreedy.com for more information, or you can email Gail at snwp.com for more information. Dr. Paul Goddard is going to be running our 2-day parent workshop coming up in April. We would like all families who can go to this please go to this. We also have the parent intensives that I described earlier. You can go to our website and look under programs to find out about upcoming intensives. We would like all families to go to 6 support groups while their child is with us. Doesn't matter if your child has a substance abuse problem or not. These are free in your community every day. So you can go to those websites there to find meetings in your area. Please stay connected to us on social media. As many of you know, we've just reorganized and rebranded as Evoke Therapy Programs, away from Second Nature Therapy Programs. So go and follow us on Evoke Therapy on Twitter. New announcements, besides just the normal quotes and content that we have, we're also going to keep you up to date with parent support groups, with parent activities, with workshops and so forth. So follow us at Evoke Therapy on Twitter and on Facebook, Evoke Therapy Programs. You can follow us there. We'll still continue to post on both Second Nature and Evoke Therapy social media for a while, for some time to get people used to it, but you can start following us there. And then, of course, you can go to our Evoke Therapy blog and look at articles. And that's another thing that we have with Evoke is an increased commitment to adding new content all the time, articles from therapists and program management will constantly be put there. And then we have the Parent Alumni Foundation book page. It's listed there. You can also find it through our Evoke Therapy website, where you go to programs and program resources, and you can see a page there that has all the categories. But this is an opportunity. This is on Amazon. It's hosted by the Alumni Foundation, the 501c3 that helps raise money for families that can't afford treatment. If you go there, it's the same cost. Any of those books are the same cost, but 10% goes to that charity. So please use that if you're going to buy a therapy book. And if there's a therapy book that's not on there, please email us at webinar at drbradreedy.com so that we can add that there, because we'd love for people to both get the book and then also get the blessing and the benefit and have other families benefit from the money that's donated there. All right, folks, the next webinar is going to be letter writing and phone calls. That'll be 2 days from now, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, Wednesday, March 18th. Any questions, anything, any suggestions, any questions after this webinar, you can email webinar at drbradreedy.com. So you can contact us there. Stephanie, have any questions come in, or is it time to close? Here we go. Can you please let us know how friends and family can sign up to see this webinar and when it will be available? We'll post it on social media. It'll be available by the end of tonight, by tomorrow morning. But if you're a current parent, you can go to the webinar and search it by a text search. Put family or family and friends or anything like that. It'll show up there. Then you can just send the link to them. And this will be a non-password protected webinar, which means nobody has a password. You can send them the link anytime, and then it will be something you can forward on to anybody, and anybody can watch it. And then if you're not a current Evoke family, then if you sign up for the webinars, which I assume the rest of you fall into that category, you can access it through your links there. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your patience and allowing me to quit last week when I was sick and unable to speak, and for my opportunity to do it again tonight. For those of you who are watching this from our archives, family and friends, I hope this provides you some sense of what we're doing here and how we're helping your friend or your family member with the issues that their child and they are struggling with. And I hope, again, it provides you a foundation, a tool set, a perspective that can help you to support them even more. So have a great evening, folks, and I will see you in 48 hours right here. Take care. Bye-bye.